I said in the last one that I would be talking a lot about the environment, and I will be. But I thought the other side I'd also show of me is my theory inside. So if you see me occasionally with a mask and tail, then that's why. I'm a grey wolf from the redwood forests. So I'll be showing off that side for me on this page from time to time too. Now, today's subject is obviously climate change, as you can see from the title here. This article basically is kind of like a dummy's guide to climate change for those of you out there who aren't really sure what it is or how to go about talking about it or whatever the case may be. So it says right here, really simple guide to climate change. This was published by the BBC, and it's from Mark. The last name I'm not going to try pronouncing there. It's at the left side there if you take a look. Who is an official climate reporter. So let's start reading. Human activities are causing world temperatures to rise, posing serious threats to people and nature. Things are likely to worsen in the coming decades, but scientists argue that urgent action can still limit the worst effects of climate change. And it says right here, what is climate change? Climate change is the long-term shift in the Earth's average temperatures and weather conditions. The world has been warming up quickly over the past 100 years or so. As a result, weather patterns are changing. Since the 1980s, each decade has been warmer than the previous one. So, what that line means, since the 1980s, each decade has been warmer than the previous one. It's basically saying that, I'm just using this as basic example. This video is all about being basic. What it's basically saying is, say 2000 to 2010, that's one decade, and it's 10 degrees. Then from 2010 to 2020, it would be 20 degrees, so on and so forth. Again, that's just me being very, very simple here. But continuing on, since the 1980s, each decade has been warmer than the previous one. And the UK Met Office says, in addition, the world's 11 warmest years on record have all happened since 2015, according to the World Meteorological Organization, WMO for short. The year 2024 was Earth's hottest ever recorded, with climate change mainly responsible for the high temperatures. It was also the first calendar year to surpass 1.5 Celsius of warming compared to pre-industrial levels of the late 1800s, according to the European Copernicus Climate Service. Sorry, some words I'm just unsure of. But moving along here. Temperatures remained high in 2025, despite a slight cooling from a natural weather pattern called La Nina. So the last 3 years were the hottest on record, according to this BBC article. And then it says here, global average temperature by year are compared with the pre-industrial average. So what we just talked about above, it says here, like I just said, global average temperature by year compared with the pre-industrial average. So the pre-industrial average here is 1850 to 1900. That's about 60 years if my math is correct here. If I'm wrong, please tell me underneath this video. And we got a small graph here. Well, maybe not small, but so 1940. And you write this starting off the pre-industrial range. And as you can see, the bars start off relatively small. Moving along here, the bars get even smaller, and they spike up, get smaller. The next one over, kind of in the middle here now. Between 1940 and 1960. Next bar, bit bigger. So as you can see, it goes very much up and down to start off with. And then as we get to more recent years, like say 1980, moving along from the 40s and the 50s and the 60s here, it starts to get higher and then goes down a bit. And then in between 1980 and 1990, and again, and starts getting really high, goes down a bit. And then once we get to the year 2000 here, it starts growing rapidly, these bars, and are turning really red. And then in the year 2020, they turn darker shades of red. The second last bar there is almost black. So that shows really how hot the last 3 years were in comparison with the pre-industrial average. Again, the pre-industrial average is 1850 to 1900. Moving on, how are humans causing climate change? The climate has changed naturally throughout the Earth's history, but natural causes cannot explain the particularly rapid warming seen over the last century. According to the UN's climate body, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, this has been without doubt caused by human activities, in particular the widespread use of fossil fuels, coal, oil, and gas in homes, factories, and transport systems. When fossil fuels burn, they release greenhouse gases. This is exactly what's happening here. So, when the fossil fuels burn, they release greenhouse gases, mostly carbon dioxide, CO2. This CO2, or carbon dioxide, acts like a blanket, trapping extra energy into the atmosphere near the Earth's surface. This causes the planet to heat up. Since the start of the Industrial Revolution, when humans started burning large amounts of fossil fuel, the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere has risen by more than 50%, far above levels seen in the Earth's recent history. The CO2 released from burning fossil fuels has a distinctive chemical fingerprint. This matches the type of CO2 increasingly found in the atmosphere. Now it says here, carbon dioxide levels are higher than any time in the last 800,000 years. Atmospheric CO2 concentrations parts per million. We got another graph. Again, following the same up and down and up trend, or up and down. So, it starts off 800,000 years ago. It starts very low, and then goes higher, and then back down, really all over the place. And then, as you can see, today, 1950 level. Today underneath, it's really high today is at the end. And so on this graph, that's where it was in 1950, pointing at the arrow there, just to make sure I'm properly straightening myself and what I'm saying out. And then the 2024 level is all the way at the top there. And then it says here, historical data from ice core records, most recent from atmospheric measurements. What effects of climate change have already been seen? Climate change has already had a huge effect, including more frequent and intense extreme weather, such as heat waves and heavy rainfall, rapid melting of glaciers and ice sheets contributing to sea level rise, the shrinking of the Arctic sea ice, warmer oceans which can fuel more intense storms and harm sea life. These changes are already having these changes are already having serious consequences for people and economies around the world. For an example, the Los Angeles fires of January 2025 could have a final cost of more than 100 BN, 74 euros BN, according to some estimates, one of the most expensive weather-related disasters in U.S. history, which obviously is really bad. Many factors were at play, but climate change increased the chances of the hot, dry weather that gave rise to the fires, according to scientists at the World Weather Attribution, WWA for short, group. And this is just a picture showing really how bad the fires were. As you can see, building there, that pretty obvious on fire, and the fire spread rapidly. And these are people here that are very lucky to have gotten out. Very, very bad. Very awful. Now it says, back in 2022, parts of East Africa suffered their worst drought for 40 years, putting more than 20 million people at risk of severe hunger. Climate change has made droughts like this at least 100 times more likely, the WWA says. Now just a reminder, WWA is the World Weather Attribution. The particular vulnerabilities of individual communities across the globe. The particular vulnerabilities of the individual communities across the globe determine who is affected by these extreme levels and how badly. Why does 1.5 Celsius matter, and how will future climate change affect the world? And so it says underneath here, the more the world warms, the worse the impacts of climate change become. Nearly 200 countries have pledged to try to limit global warming to 1.5 Celsius above of previous levels as part of the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement. That target is generally understood to relate to an average annual increase of 1.5 Celsius recorded over 20 years, rather than a one-off rise captured in an individual 12-month period. Long-term warming of 1.5 Celsius would still bring serious consequences for many populations, but a very large body of scientific evidence shows that warming of 2 Celsius or more would bring far greater impacts on top of those felt at 1.5 Celsius, the IPCC says. These include more people being exposed to extreme heat, higher sea levels as glaciers and ice sheets melt, increased risks to food security in some regions due to more extreme weather, greater chances of some climate-sensitive diseases spreading, such as dengue, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Sometimes I am not pronouncing things properly. Anyways, moving on. More species being threatened with extinction. The loss of virtually all coral reefs, which would be very, very bad. The call to restrict temperature rise to 1.5 Celsius was partly designed to avoid crossing so-called tipping points. And if we go over those tipping points, again, that would not be good for anyone, especially the environment. It is not clear exactly where they sit, but once these thresholds are passed, changes could accelerate and become irreversible. These could include the collapse of the Greenland ice sheet, warm Atlantic Ocean currents, or further loss of the Amazon rainforest, which we do not want to lose. The Amazon rainforest, they are very important. And we will cover the Amazon rainforests at another time. So these are the Earth's poles. It says here, the Earth's poles are especially vulnerable to rising temperature. And this is a picture of them. About 3.3 to 3.6 billion people are highly vulnerable to climate change, according to the IPCC. People living in poorer countries are expected to suffer most, as they have fewer resources to adapt. This has led to questions about fairness, because these places have typically only been responsible for a small percentage of greenhouse gas emissions. Excuse me. So, kind of recapping some of this here, and kind of repeating here. It says people living in poorer countries are expected to suffer most, as they have fewer resources to adapt. Like fewer ways to maybe get food, water, or shelter, something like that. Again, those are just examples. Trying to be as basic as possible for today. So again, repeating. People living in poorer countries are expected to suffer most, as they have fewer resources to adapt. This has led to questions about fairness, because these places have typically only been responsible for a small percentage of greenhouse gas emissions. However, knock-on impacts could be felt over a wide areas. For example, crop failures linked to extreme weather could raise food prices across the globe. What are governments doing about climate change? Recent net zero CO2, or as we covered above here, CO2 is basically means carbon dioxide, as you see right here, carbon dioxide, CO2, right beside greenhouse gases, mostly carbon dioxide. Now, going back down to where we were. It says, like I just said before, what are governments doing about climate change? Reaching net zero CO2, or carbon dioxide, emissions is essential to limit global warming, the IPCC says. This means reducing emissions as much as possible and actively removing any remaining emissions from the atmosphere. Most countries have or are considering net zero targets. There has been encouraging progress in some areas, such as the growth of renewable energy and electric vehicles. Again, the gas emissions from gas-powered cars are extremely bad. That's why electric powered vehicles. Now, this doesn't mean I necessarily agree with what Elon Musk is doing. I'm just saying, using Tesla as an example, those are electric cars, and electric is better. But we're not going to be talking about Mr. Musk. Moving on here. There has been encouraging progress in some areas, such as the growth of renewable energy and electric vehicles, but humanity's CO2 emissions are still at record highs. Long-term warming, rather than temperatures seen in an individual year, reach between 1.34 C or Celsius and 1.41 Celsius in 2024. The WWO says, the WMO. Don't know where I got the WWMO, whatever I said before, from. And I remember the WMO stood for. Go back here just to refresh ourselves. The WMO stood for the World Meteorological Organization. Now, going back down to where we were. Long-term warming, rather than temperatures seen in an individual year, reached between 1.34 Celsius and 1.41 Celsius in 2024, the WMO says. At current rates of warming, this means that the 1.5 Celsius target could be breached around the year 2030. In a speech in October 2025, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, I hope I'm pronouncing that name correctly. I don't like messing anyone's name up. If it's your name, I want to get it correct. Antonio conceded that overshooting 1.5 Celsius was now inevitable, given how close the target is and how high emissions remain. But he says that he hoped temperatures could still be brought back down to the 1.5 Celsius target by the end of the century. However, without substantial intervention to change current policies, it is thought warming could reach close to 3 Celsius by that point. World far off track for 1.5 Celsius target. So here we have another graph, and it says here historical and projected greenhouse gas emissions by year and future warming levels in two scenarios. So on the graph here, it says right there current policies 2.5 to 2.9 Celsius. And so we got the side there 10 GT, 30 GT, 50 GT, and so on and so forth. This is the past emissions. And the black line there, as I was saying, the past emissions. And this is the 1.5 Celsius target that they're trying to reach for. It says note at the bottom there. Emissions measured in gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent warming shown for year 2100 versus pre-industrial levels. Broad lines and show possible range. Moving on here. World leaders meet every year to discuss their climate commitments. The most recent summit, COP30 in 2025, ended without any new agreements on fossil fuels or deforestation. In the final deal, countries had previously agreed on the need to transition away from fossil fuels and energy systems. At the COP28 talks in 2023, at COP29 in 2024, richer countries committed to giving developing nations at least 300 BN a year by 2035 to help them tackle climate change, but this is far less than poorer countries say they need it. Governments will gather in Turkey for the next round of talks, COP31 in November 2026, which, again, we won't be covering this until November, but we will be covering this eventually. What What can individuals do about climate change? Major changes need to come from governments and businesses, but individuals can also help through actions like taking fewer flights, using less energy, improving their home's installation and energy efficiency, switching to electric vehicles or living car-free, replacing gas as central heating with electric systems like heat pumps, eating less red meat. Oh, sorry about that. Moving on here. And that is the end of this article. So, I hope you gathered something from this. Again, if you think I'm wrong about anything, or if you thought the examples I was using were inaccurate, then please let me know underneath this video. Now, I will be saying this quote probably at the end of every single thing I upload here. Just remember, when the last tree has been cut down, the last fish caught, the last river poisoned, only then will we realize we cannot eat money. That is a Cree Indian proverb. I will be repeating that a lot, like I said, probably at the end of every video. Thank you for watching this if you did. And this was today's theme. Coming in the future will be some theory and stuff. But for the first few videos, we'll probably be sticking to topics like what we talked about today. Thank you, and goodbye for now.